It started with a small dispute over property boundaries. I thought it would end there. It didn't. Corinne Davis, my neighbor, decided to escalate. She had already started planting an illegal fence on the boundary line, blocking my access to a creek that ran along the easement. When I pushed back politely and with proper legal documentation, Corinne called the sheriff. Deputy Rogers showed up, glanced at the documents, and told her to have a pleasant day. You'd think that would be the end, but Corinne had no intention of letting this go. 2 weeks after the boundary dispute with Corinne Davis, I returned home to a scene of deliberate destruction. My fence was cut in 3 places, the chain link sagging like a defeated soldier. Deep tire tracks scarred the muddy ground near the creek, and one of my beehives, home to thousands of honeybees I'd tended for years, lay in ruins. The wooden frames were splintered, scattered across the grass, with honey oozing into the dirt like spilled gold. The air buzzed with the frantic hum of displaced bees, their home destroyed. As I surveyed the damage, my dog Pixel, a scrappy border collie mix, yelped in pain. My heart sank as I found him limping, a rusty nail board, crudely hammered together and hidden in the tall grass near the fence line, lodged in his paw. I rushed him to the vet, where Dr. Patel extracted the nail, cleaned the wound, and prescribed antibiotics. Keep a close eye for infection, she warned, her tone grim. The bill was $220, but the real cost was the rage building inside me. This wasn't an accident. Someone had targeted my property, my livelihood, and now my dog. I was done playing defense. I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras from a local security supplier, top-of-the-line models that sent real-time alerts to my phone every 10 seconds until I silenced them. They arrived the next day, and I spent the afternoon mounting them strategically. 1 on the barn overlooking the creek, 2 along the fence line, and 1 near the beehive remnants. Each had night vision and a wide-angle lens, ensuring no corner of the property went unwatched. I wasn't just protecting my land, I was building a case. Next, I called Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor with a reputation for precision and a no-nonsense attitude. She arrived the following morning, her pickup truck loaded with equipment. Nora was a wiry woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a handshake that could crush walnuts. She reviewed my property deed, paced the boundary with a GPS unit, and drove fluorescent orange stakes into the ground at each corner. For good measure, she attached laminated placards to the stakes, each one citing state law. Tampering with survey monuments is a Class B misdemeanor, punishable by up to 6 months in jail and a $2,000 fine. I liked Nora already. That night at 1:13 a.m., my phone lit up with camera alerts. I opened the app and watched a live stream from the barn camera. 2 figures in dark hoodies moved along the creek, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlit water. One yanked a fluorescent stake from the ground and hurled it into the creek with a splash. The other, shorter and wielding bolt cutters, snipped at the remaining fence wire. My pulse raced as the taller figure turned, his face briefly illuminated by moonlight. I didn't have facial recognition software, but I didn't need it. I saved the footage and called Deputy Rogers at dawn. Rogers arrived by 7 a.m., his cruiser kicking up dust on my gravel drive. I showed him the video, pausing on the frame where the taller figure's face was clearest. "That's Chandler Hayes," Rogers said, shaking his head. "Known him since he was boosting car stereos at 16. He's on probation for check fraud." The second figure was harder to identify at first, but a glint of platinum blonde hair under the hoodie gave her away. It was Corinne Davis, caught red-handed. Rogers didn't waste time. He secured a warrant for criminal mischief and trespassing by noon. At 6:45 a.m. the next day, he and 2 deputies knocked on Chandler's door. I later saw the body cam footage. Chandler, bleary-eyed in pajama pants, swore he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up a printed still from my camera, Chandler mid-grimace clutching bolt cutters. Chandler's mouth snapped shut, his bravado evaporating. Corinne's arrest was less dramatic but no less satisfying. Rogers found the stolen stakes in her garage, stacked neatly beside Nora's laminated placards. A half-empty can of neon orange spray paint, the same shade defacing my no trespassing signs, sat on her workbench. Corinne claimed Chandler had stored tools there without her knowledge, but Rogers wasn't buying it. "You're on camera, Ms. Davis," he said, cuffing her. "Let's talk at the station." Both were booked at the county jail. Karen posted bond by lunchtime, her attorney already spinning excuses. Chandler wasn't so lucky. His 2021 probation for check kiting meant a no-bond hold until a judge reviewed his case. As I repaired my fence and nursed Pixel's paw, I felt a grim satisfaction. The cameras were still rolling, and I wasn't done yet. With Chandler Hayes languishing in county jail, denied bond due to his probation status, the fallout from Karen Davis's vendetta took a sharp turn into uncharted territory. My lawyer, Elliot Gaines, a meticulous man with a penchant for uncovering financial breadcrumbs, saw an opportunity to dig deeper. The $3,500 gate Karen had unlawfully installed on the easement, blocking my creek access, wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a paper trail. Elliot subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, determined to trace the funds. What we uncovered was a bombshell that shook the neighborhood. The gate's payment came via a cashier's check signed by Chandler, drawn directly from the HOA's reserve account. This raised red flags. Chandler, it turned out, wasn't just Karen's lackey. He was the HOA's volunteer bookkeeper, a role he'd held for 3 years. Elliot's team combed through the HOA's ledgers and found a pattern of irregularities. Over the past 2 years, Chandler had issued checks totaling $46,900 for grounds improvements that never materialized. There were invoices for landscaping that didn't exist, irrigation systems never installed, and a $12,000 consulting fee for a firm with no online presence or state registration. The gate was merely the latest in a string of fraudulent schemes. The HOA board, a group of well-meaning but overworked volunteers, was blindsided. At an emergency meeting attended by 24 homeowners, they reviewed Elliot's findings. Faces paled as the numbers sank in. The board voted unanimously to press charges against Chandler for embezzlement and fraud. They also hired a forensic accountant to audit the books, a move that would later uncover even more discrepancies. For now, though, the focus was on Chandler and Karen. Detective Miriam Page, a sharp investigator from the county's white-collar crime unit, took the lead. She executed a search warrant on Chandler's home, seizing his desktop computer, a dusty laptop, and a stack of external hard drives. What she found was a digital goldmine of deception: forged receipts, fake HOA meeting minutes, and a Word template for neon green approved stamps used to authenticate fraudulent invoices. One folder, labeled Consulting, contained wire transfer records showing $8,500 funneled into Karen's personal bank account over 6 months, disguised as payments for land use advisory services. Karen, it seemed, wasn't just a bystander, she was complicit. Karen lawyered up immediately. Her attorney, James Hall, a $600 per hour litigator with a reputation for stonewalling, filed motions to suppress the garage evidence and dismiss the trespassing charges, arguing the camera footage was inconclusive. He refused to answer questions from the press or the HOA, issuing only a curt statement: "My client maintains her innocence." But Chandler, facing probation revocation and new felony charges that could land him in prison for years, was less composed. Detective Page offered him a lifeline: cooperate fully, and the DA might recommend a lighter sentence. Desperate, Chandler agreed to testify. His statement was damning. According to Chandler, Karen had masterminded the gate installation, using HOA funds to pressure me into ceding the easement. She promised him a cut of the land's value if the HOA could annex it for a proposed community park. Chandler admitted to forging documents and siphoning funds, but insisted Karen had directed every major move, including the late-night stake-pulling escapade. He provided text messages between them, including one from Karen at 11:42 p.m. the night of the vandalism: "Make sure the stakes are gone by morning. I'll handle the rest." The HOA, meanwhile, took steps to rebuild trust. They issued a public apology to me, acknowledging their failure to oversee Chandler's bookkeeping. They also reimbursed me $1,200 for the damaged beehive and fence repairs, using funds recovered from Chandler's frozen bank account. It wasn't the full cost, but it was a gesture of goodwill. The new board president, a retired teacher named Linda Voss, personally delivered the check and a handwritten note promising stricter oversight. On my end, small victories piled up. Pixel's paw healed without infection, and he was back to chasing squirrels along the creek. Nora Beltran's survey stakes were replaced, this time with concrete reinforced markers that would take a jackhammer to remove. My camera is still vigilant, caught nothing but deer and the occasional raccoon. Deputy Rogers, now a regular visitor, stopped by with coffee one morning to update me on Chandler's case. "He's singing like a canary," Rogers said, grinning. "Karen's in deep." As the legal gears ground forward, I felt a cautious optimism. The evidence was ironclad, and Chandler's testimony was a sledgehammer. Karen's high-priced lawyer could delay, but he couldn't erase the truth. For the first time in months, I slept without checking the camera feeds. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, packed with HOA members, local reporters, and a handful of curious neighbors. After months of legal maneuvering, the trial of Karen Davis and Chandler Hayes had finally arrived. The charges were heavy: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. My lawyer, Elliot Gaines, had spent weeks preparing me for the stand, but the real weight of the moment hit when I saw Karen, her platinum blonde hair now dulled, sitting stiffly beside her $600 an hour attorney, James Hall. Chandler, in an ill-fitting suit, looked like a man who'd already accepted his fate. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Assistant DA Rachel Torres opened with my motion sensor camera footage, projected on a large screen for the jury. The grainy night vision showed Karen and Chandler at 1:13 a.m., yanking survey stakes and tossing them into the creek. A second clip from my Ring camera captured them loading rebar into Karen's SUV at 12:47 a.m. the same night, their faces unmistakable under the floodlights. The timestamps were a gut punch, tying them directly to the vandalism. The jury leaned forward, some scribbling notes, others glaring at the defendants. Chandler's testimony was the turning point. Under a plea deal, he'd agreed to a 4-year sentence with parole eligibility in 2, plus an 18-month term for violating his 2021 check-kiting probation. In exchange, he laid bare Karen's scheme. On the stand, his voice cracked as he described how Karen had approached him a year earlier, pitching the idea of annexing my land for an HOA-controlled community park. She promised him a $10,000 cut from the land's eventual sale, using his bookkeeping access to funnel HOA funds for the gate and other expenses. Chandler admitted to forging invoices and defacing my property, but insisted Karen was the mastermind. "She said no one would care about a few stakes," he mumbled, avoiding Karen's icy stare. Text messages recovered from Chandler's phone sealed the deal. One from Karen, sent hours before the vandalism, read, "Get it done tonight, no excuses." Another, post-arrest, showed her urging him to stick to the story about the tools in her garage. The jury didn't need much more. Detective Miriam Page's evidence, forged receipts, fake meeting minutes, and $8,500 in consulting payments to Karen's account painted a picture of calculated greed. Karen's defense was flimsy. James Hall argued she was a victim of Chandler's deceit, unaware of his embezzlement or the vandalism. But the camera footage and Chandler's testimony shredded her claims. When Karen took the stand, her composure cracked under Torres' cross-examination. "So you're saying you didn't notice stolen survey stakes in your own garage?" Torres asked, holding up a photo of the evidence. Karen stammered, her face flushing, and the jury's expressions hardened. After 3 days of testimony and 4 hours of deliberation, the verdict came: guilty on all counts. The courtroom buzzed as the foreperson read the charges: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and trespassing. Karen's bond was revoked on the spot, her hands cuffed as she was led away. Chandler, already in custody, hung his head. Sentencing followed a week later. Chandler's plea deal held, locking in his 4-year term. Karen, defiant to the end, received 18 months in prison, $32,000 in restitution to me for damages, and $46,900 to the HOA for the embezzled funds. A 5-year no-contact order barred her from approaching me after release. As Karen was escorted out, I caught her eye. I gave a small, polite wave, not out of spite, but because it felt like closing a chapter. The weight of the past year lifted slightly, though the scars remained: my ruined beehive, Pixel's injury, the sleepless nights checking camera feeds. But justice, however imperfect, had been served. Back home, the victory felt quieter but no less profound. The HOA, under new leadership, sent a formal apology and a $4,500 check from Chandler's frozen accounts to repair my beehives and fence. I used part of it to rebuild the apiary, the hum of new bees a soothing reminder of resilience. Pixel, fully recovered, bounded along the creek, chasing dragonflies in the spring sun. I turned my attention to the land Karen had tried to steal. Where her illegal gate once stood, I broke ground on a greenhouse, a modest 12 by 20-foot structure with polycarbonate panels and cedar framing. The first seedlings, tomatoes, basil, and peppers, went in a month later, their green tips pushing through the soil. It was more than a garden, it was a reclamation of space, a refusal to let Karen's malice define my home. The cameras stayed up, but their alerts grew rare. Deer, not vandals, tripped the motion sensors now. As summer approached, I walked the property line with a cup of coffee, Nora Beltran's concrete-reinforced stakes glinting in the dawn light. The creek flowed freely and the bees buzzed contentedly. For the first time in months, I felt not just safe but hopeful. The fight had been brutal, but it was over. New beginnings were taking root, and I was ready to nurture them. The dust from the trial settled, leaving a quiet that felt both foreign and welcome. The HOA, now under a reformed board led by Linda Voss, was eager to repair its reputation. A week after Karen Davis and Chandler Hayes were sentenced, Linda arrived at my doorstep with a manila envelope. Inside was a formal letter of apology, signed by every board member, acknowledging their failure to oversee Chandler's bookkeeping and Karen's manipulations. Tucked behind it was a check for $4,500 drawn from Chandler's seized assets to cover repairs to my beehives, fence, and Pixel's vet bills. "It's not everything," Linda said, her eyes earnest, "but it's a start." I nodded, accepting the gesture. The money wasn't just restitution, it was a signal that the community wanted to move forward. I wasted no time putting the funds to work. The beehives, my pride and joy, had taken the hardest hit. The destroyed hive was one of 4, home to a colony of Italian honeybees I'd nurtured for 3 seasons. I ordered new Langstroth frames, a cedar hive box, and a fresh queen from a local apiary. By early summer, the colony was rebuilding, the hum of worker bees filling the air as they danced between clover patches. The $4,500 also covered a new section of chain-link fence, this time reinforced with steel posts sunk deep into the ground. Pixel, his paw fully healed, patrolled the perimeter, tail wagging as he chased butterflies instead of limping from nailboards. The land dispute, though resolved in court, had left a lingering wound, a patch of earth where Karen's illegal gate had stood, its concrete footings still half buried like stubborn ghosts. I decided to reclaim that space, not with anger but with creation. I'd always dreamed of a greenhouse, a place to grow heirloom vegetables and extend the growing season through the chilly fall. With the restitution funds as a seed, I hired a local contractor, Maria Sanchez, who specialized in sustainable builds. Maria, a wiry woman with a quick laugh and a knack for precision, designed a 12 by 20-foot greenhouse with polycarbonate panels, cedar framing, and a rainwater collection system. "This'll outlast us all," she said, hammering the final support beam. Construction took 3 weeks, and by mid-July the greenhouse stood gleaming in the sun, its interior smelling of fresh soil and possibility. I planted my first crops, Roma tomatoes, sweet basil, jalapenos, and a row of marigolds to attract pollinators. The bees, now thriving, zipped between the greenhouse and their hives, their numbers growing stronger each day. Standing in that warm, humid space, watching seedlings unfurl, I felt a shift. Karen's attempt to steal this land had failed, and in its place, I'd built something lasting, something mine. The HOA's transformation mirrored my own. Linda and the new board implemented strict financial oversight, hiring an independent auditor to review every transaction. They also launched a community newsletter, detailing their efforts to recover the $46,900 Chandler had embezzled. A portion of his frozen accounts had already been redistributed, with more expected once his assets were fully liquidated. The board invited me to their next meeting, not as a defendant but as a neighbor. I declined politely, preferring to let my land speak for me, but I appreciated the gesture. The cameras, still mounted around my property, now caught only wildlife: deer nibbling clover, a fox darting through the creek at dusk. The alerts, once a nightly dread, became a quiet reassurance. Pixel, ever my faithful shadow, reveled in the renewed peace. His morning walks along the creek became our ritual, his nose twitching at every scent, his black and white fur dappled by sunlight filtering through the oaks. The concrete survey stakes placed by Nora Beltran stood untouched, their fluorescent orange tips a silent victory. Deputy Rogers stopped by one afternoon, his cruiser idling as he handed me a thermos of coffee. "Heard you're growing tomatoes," he said, grinning. "Save me one." I laughed, promising him a basket when the romas ripened. Beyond my property, the neighborhood began to heal. The HOA organized a cleanup day, clearing debris from the creek and planting native grasses along its banks. A few residents, inspired by my greenhouse, started their own gardens, swapping seeds and tips at impromptu meetups. I shared a few marigold seedlings, happy to see the community knitting itself back together. The memory of Karen's gate faded, replaced by raised beds and budding friendships. But the story wasn't quite over. A letter arrived in late August, postmarked from the county clerk's office. It was a notice of a lien against Karen's property, filed by the state to secure the $32,000 she owed me in restitution. Her prison wages, garnished at $58 a month, would barely dent the debt, but the lien ensured her land couldn't be sold or transferred until I was paid. It was a small, symbolic win, one that felt like the final nail in her scheme. As fall approached, I stood in the greenhouse, pruning tomato vines heavy with fruit. The air smelled of earth and herbs, and outside the bees buzzed in their endless dance. Pixel sprawled in the grass, basking in the late sun. The creek, once a battleground, flowed freely, its ripples catching the light. I thought of Karen, now a fatting shadow in a prison cell, and Chandler serving his time. Their actions had scarred my land, but they hadn't broken it. Instead, they'd given me a chance to build something better, a fresh start rooted in resilience. I hung a small sign on the greenhouse door, hand-painted in green: "Grow where you're planted." It was a reminder not just for me, but for anyone who'd faced a fight and kept going. The land was mine, the bees were thriving, and Pixel's tail thumped against the earth. New opportunities bloomed, and I was ready to tend them, one season at a time. A year after the trial, the scars of Karen Davis's vendetta had faded, replaced by the vibrant green of my greenhouse and the steady hum of my beehives. The creek flowed unhindered, and Pixel, my loyal border collie mix, bounded through the tall grass, his paw long-heeled. The HOA, under Linda Voss's steady leadership, had stabilized, with new bylaws and an independent auditor ensuring no repeat of Chandler Hayes's fraud. I thought the saga was behind me, until a letter arrived, postmarked from a law firm in the next county. The letter was from Elaine Castor, who claimed to be Karen's cousin and heir to her estate. She asserted that Karen had granted her a private right-of way across my land, citing a supposed deed dated before Karen's arrest. The document, attached as a blurry photocopy, smelled of desperation, a last-ditch attempt to muddy my property rights and force a settlement. My stomach churned, but I wasn't the same person who'd faced Karen's first fence. I called Elliot Gaines, my lawyer, who chuckled grimly. "They're fishing," he said. "Let reel them in." Elliot subpoenaed the county recorder's office and cross-referenced the deed against my title records. The document was a forgery, its notary seal lifted from a deceased attorney's expired license. Nora Beltran, the surveyor who'd staked my land, provided a sworn affidavit confirming no such right-of-way existed. Faced with our evidence, Elaine's attorney withdrew the claim days before a scheduled hearing, citing client miscommunication. Elliot suspected Karen had orchestrated the ploy from prison, using Elaine as a proxy. The stunt cost me $1,200 in legal fees, but it was worth it to slam the door shut. The land was mine, indisputably. Spring brought unexpected windfalls. The state's crime victim fund sent a restitution check for $1,800, the first installment of Karen's garnished prison wages. At $58 a month, it would take decades to cover the $32,000 she owed me, but the symbolism mattered, a steady drip of accountability. The HOA also recovered another $10,000 from Chandler's liquidated assets, part of which funded a community garden project near the creek. Linda Voss invited me to the groundbreaking, but I sent a flat of marigold seedlings instead, content to let the neighborhood heal without my spotlight. Then came a surprise from an unlikely source, Chandler Hayes. A letter arrived from the state penitentiary, written in neat, slanting handwriting. Chandler apologized for his role in the vandalism and fraud, admitting he'd been swayed by Karen's promises of easy money. He'd spent his first year incarcerated earning a paralegal certificate, hoping to rebuild his life after release. Enclosed was a hand-drawn map of my property, marked with suggestions for an orchard, apple and pear trees along the creek where the soil was richest. "I know it doesn't fix things," he wrote, "but I owe you something." I was stunned. Chandler's actions had cost me thousands, yet here he was, offering a gesture of atonement. I wrote back, keeping it brief, "The sunflowers are taller than ever, thanks for the map." I didn't promise forgiveness, some wounds cut too deep, but I tucked the map into a drawer, a reminder that people could change even if trust took longer. The neighborhood continued to transform. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, purchased Karen's foreclosed property at auction, intending to turn it into a community farm. They reached out, asking if I'd consult on pollinator-friendly plants, given my success with the beehives. I agreed, spending a Saturday with their director, a botanist named Priya Patel, mapping out native wildflowers, bee balm, coneflower, and milkweed, to attract pollinators. Priya's enthusiasm was infectious, and as we worked, I felt a quiet pride. Karen's land, once a symbol of control, was becoming a gift to the community. By late spring, the first wildflowers bloomed on the former Davis property, their purples and yellows drawing bees from my hives. Pixel and I walked the creek daily, his tail a blur as he sniffed the new growth. The concrete survey stakes, unmolested, stood like sentinels, and my greenhouse thrived, its tomato vines heavy with fruit. The cameras, still vigilant, recorded only wildlife, a hawk circling at dusk, a raccoon splashing in the creek. As I stood by the greenhouse one evening, pruning basil under the fatting sun, I realized the saga had come full circle. Karen's schemes, Elaine's gambit, Chandler's fraud, they'd all failed to break me. Instead, they'd forged something stronger, a home rooted in resilience, a community finding its way back. The bees buzzed, Pixel sprawled in the grass, and the creek whispered its endless song. I was exactly where I belonged. Sprout Tomorrow, the organic farming nonprofit that purchased Karen Davis's foreclosed property, turned her former lawn into a symbol of renewal. The irony was rich. Karen, who'd wielded HOA rules like a cudgel, had lost her land to a group dedicated to community and growth. They invited me to consult on their pollinator garden, and I spent a spring morning with their director, Priya Patel, planting native wildflowers, bee balm, coneflower, and milkweed, to draw bees from my hives. As we worked, Priya grinned, dirt smudged on her cheek. "This place is going to feed people," she said. I nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Karen's legacy of control was being overwritten, one seedling at a time. The nonprofit's first volunteer day was a revelation. Sprout Tomorrow rallied 24 neighbors, including new HOA members eager to move past the scandal. I loaned them my brush cutter, its blade sharp enough to clear the overgrown patches Karen had neglected. Deputy Rogers showed up off-duty, hauling bags of compost in his pickup. Linda Voss, the HOA president, worked alongside Priya, their laughter rising over the hum of shovels. By dusk, the lot was transformed, raised beds framed in cedar, tomato vines staked, and wildflower patches buzzing with my bees. The air smelled of fresh earth and possibility, a stark contrast to the hostility that once defined this ground. Rogers lingered after, sipping lemonade from a Sprout Tomorrow cooler. "Never thought I'd see this," he said, gesturing at the garden. "You started something here." I shrugged, deflecting the credit. The real victory was collective, a neighborhood reclaiming its spirit. Karen's gate, Chandler's fraud, the late-night vandalism, they'd been alchemized into something life-giving. My greenhouse, just across the creek, stood as a parallel, its Roma tomatoes ripening under the sun. The transformation was therapeutic for everyone. A teenager from the HOA, shy but curious, asked to learn about my beehives, and I spent an afternoon showing her how to check frames without startling the colony. Linda organized a seed swap, and I traded marigold packets for zucchini seeds, forging quiet bonds with neighbors I once viewed warily. Pixel, ever the ambassador, wove through the garden, earning pats and treats from volunteers. The concrete survey stakes, untouched, gleamed in the morning light, a silent testament to the battle won. By summer, Sprout Tomorrow's garden was thriving, its raised beds bursting with kale, peppers, and heirloom tomatoes. The wildflowers drew pollinators from across the creek, boosting my hive's output, my best honey yield in years. Standing on my property, I could see the nonprofit's lot, no longer Karen's domain but a vibrant patchwork of growth. The cameras, still mounted, recorded only deer and volunteers, their alerts a gentle hum rather than a jolt. The final victory wasn't just the garden or the restitution checks trickling in from Karen's garnished wages. It was the sense of closure, the knowledge that malice had been outlasted by resilience. As I walked the creek with Pixel, his tail a blur, I felt the weight of the past lift. Karen's schemes had failed, Chandler's apology had planted a seed, and the community had turned a battleground into a haven. The bees buzzed, the tomatoes ripened, and the earth kept turning full circle and firmly ours. By October, Sprout Tomorrow's community garden, born from Karen Davis's former property, hosted a harvest dinner. Tables lined the lot, laden with dishes sourced from the raised beds: roasted butternut squash, garlic honey carrots, and heirloom tomato bruschetta. Neighbors laughed, kids darted between rows of wildflowers, and my bees' honey glistened in jars as centerpieces. Priya Patel, the nonprofit's director, gave me a nod during her toast, but I waved it off. The real victory was this: nourishment rising from hostility. I'd built a barn that summer, legitimately permitted, using reclaimed wood from Karen's old gate. Its cedar beams stood sturdy, housing tools and a small apiary workbench, a quiet monument to what I'd overcome. Pixel, my border collie mix, christened it by napping in the straw, his tail thumping against the floor. The greenhouse thrived nearby, its tomato vines heavy, while the creek flowed freely, unmarred by illegal fences. The HOA, now transparent and neighborly, sent occasional updates on restitution.